Kelly from Kelly's Amigurumi. I will review how to Tunisian crochet a heart for right-handed individuals in this tutorial. The video's description includes a link for the left-handed tutorial. The skills covered in this video include the Tunisian simple stitch and stranded Tunisian color work, or changing colors within rows. The materials you need to complete this pattern include 2 different colors of yarn of the same weight and thickness, Tunisian crochet hook appropriate for your yarn weight, scissors, and an optional yarn hook to weave in loose ends. Let's review the heart pattern. I used graph paper to sketch out how I want the heart to look. I numbered the rows along the vertical axis, and I numbered the loops on the hook along the horizontal axis. The heart pattern consists of 10 rows of 11 loops. I number the loops going right to left since I will crochet right to left. I will use 2 colors for the heart pattern. Color A is the background color denoted as white, and color B is the heart color denoted as black. I will change colors on my forward pass and will not carry my yarn throughout my work. I can look across a row to determine how many strands of each color I will need to crochet the row. I will use 1 strand of color A to complete row 1. I will incorporate a strand of color B and a second strand of color A in row 2. I will keep this 3 strands of yarn and increase my color B sections and decrease my color A sections throughout rows 3 through 6. Row 7 and 8 will be the same as row 6. Row 9 is the crux of the pattern since I will need to use 3 strands of color A and 2 strands of color B. I then will finish row 10 with 1 strand of color A. I started the pattern by chaining 11 and completing a Tunisian crochet foundation row for row 1. I will incorporate color B and a second strand of color A in row 2. I'll add in color B in the 6th loop. I already have 1 loop on my hook, so I'm going to work a Tunisian simple stitch in the next 4 stitches. Then with 5 loops on my hook, I'll insert my hook into the next stitch, find color B, and yarn over, completing the Tunisian simple stitch with color B. I'm going to leave both the tail and the working end of color B in the center, insert my hook into the next stitch, and find a second strand of color A, yarning over and completing my Tunisian simple stitch. I will keep working the Tunisian simple stitches with color A, and I'm going to secure the tail right away. So I'm going to lay my tail over the next stitch after I've inserted my hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then I will move the tail to the back. And continue with the Tunisian simple stitch, working the forward pass, completing the final Tunisian stitch, going through the front and back loops, and starting my return pass. Until I have 1 loop remaining of color A. I'm going to tighten each of my 3 strands of yarn, and I'm going to leave my second strand of color A where it is, and I need to secure the tail of color B with this last and I need to secure the tail end of color B. So I'm going to lay my tail over my hook, yarn over, and pull through a loop. I'll pull on all 3 strands of yarn again and finish with my first strand of color A. Anytime I see that my work needs to have even tension, I can pull on the different strands of yarn. I'm now going to be crocheting with 3 different strands of yarn. I will increase the color B section from 1 to 9 loops while decreasing my color A sections from 5 to 1 loops throughout rows 3 through 6. I will start each row by Tunisian simple stitching with color A, until 1 loop before my color B section. I then will insert my hook, let go of the color A strand, and switch to Tunisian simple stitching with the color B strand. Making sure to grab my working end, the tail will remain where it is until the end. I will Tunisian simple stitch with color B, one loop past my color B section from the previous row. I'll insert my hook, let go of my color B strand, grab a hold of my second color A strand. Again, making sure to grab the working end. I'll finish my forward pass with my second color A strand. Start my return pass, yarning over, pulling through 1, yarning over, pulling through 2, until I have 1 loop left of color A. I'll make my tension even among my 3 sections, start my return pass with color B, need to even my tension again. Continue working with color B until 1 loop remains. And then I'll switch back to my first color A strand for the rest of my return pass. Showing you how to increase the color B section and decrease the color A section one more time. Start Tunisian simple stitching with the color A strand, and 1 loop before your color B section, you'll switch to color B. You'll insert the hook, let go of the color A strand, grab a hold of the color B strand, and continue with your forward pass of Tunisian simple stitches. Going 1 loop past your color B section from the round before. Switching to the second color A strand in your next loop. Letting go of color B, grabbing hold of your second color A strand, finishing the forward pass. doing your last Tunisian simple stitch, going through the front and back loops, and starting your return pass. Yarning over, pulling through one, and yarning over, pulling through 2 loops until 1 loop remains of color A. Let's make our tension even. You'll start working with color B for the return pass. Until 1 loop remains. And then you'll switch back to color A. You can continue with that pattern until you have 9 loops of color B in your pattern. I'll keep 9 loops of color B in rows 7 and 8. I'll start each of those rows with a loop of color A on my hook, and I'm immediately going to start working Tunisian simple stitches with color B. And I'm going to work them into each stitch across. Until my last color B stitch from the previous row. I'm then going to switch to my second strand of color A for my last Tunisian stitch, working into the front and back loops. And I'm going to start my return pass or my chain 1 with color A. For the rest of my return pass, I will work with color B, yarning over, pulling through 2 loops. Until 1 loop remains of color B. Evening my tension and then switching to color A for the last of my return pass. Completing that pattern for row 8. Row 9 is our last row of stranded work and is the crux of the pattern because it will require us to manage 5 strands of yarn. I'm going to start with 1 loop of color A on my hook, and I'm going to work 1 Tunisian simple stitch with color A. I'm going to leave that strand where it is and work 3 Tunisian simple stitches with color B, bringing me to the center of my heart. I then need to grab a 3rd strand of color A, and I'm just going to work this 1 loop of color A. So I'll insert my hook, grab a hold of that 3rd strand of color A, work 1 Tunisian simple stitch, and I'm going to leave both the working and tail end there, and I'll capture my tail end on my return pass. I'll insert my hook and I need to grab a 2nd strand of color B. I'm going to yarn over and pull through with that 2nd strand, insert my hook into the next stitch, and I'm going to capture my tail right away as before. So I'll lay it in front of the stitch, yarn over, and pull through. And I'll work 1 more Tunisian simple stitch before switching to my awaiting color A strand. for my last Tunisian simple stitch and my final Tunisian stitch of the forward pass. I'll start my return pass with color A, yarning over, pulling through one loop, and then yarning over, pulling through two loops. I have one loop left of color A, so I'll switch to my second strand of color B, continuing with my return pass until one loop remains of color B. At this point, I'll even my tension among all my strands. And because I have one strand left of color B, I will work with that one strand of color A. I need to capture my tail still, so I will lay my tail in front, find my working end, yarn over, and pull through two loops. Moving it to the back, evening all my tension, finding my next strand of color B, yarning over, pulling through two with color B until one loop remains of color B. And then I'm going to switch back to my first strand of color A to finish my return pass. I am going to work row 10 with one strand of color A that's on my hook, and to make it easier to manage, I'm going to cut the other strands, since all I will need to do with them is weave in the loose ends. I'll then work a Tunisian simple stitch in each of the stitches across, working with the one strand of color A, and I could capture the tails, my new tails, by laying them in front when I yarn over. And then pushing them back to the back. Just thinking how to capture my new tails. One time will be enough. I'll take time to weave in the loose ends. Capturing the tails at this point will help me keep my tension through to the end. So I lay it in front, push the tails in back, and continue with my forward pass. I'll work my last Tunisian stitch of the row, and work my return pass. And I'll bind off with my color A strand by doing a chain stitch across. So I'll insert my hook as if doing a Tunisian simple stitch, and then yarn over and pull through all loops, creating a chain stitch. And I'll work the chain stitch down my work. work a chain stitch into the last stitch of the round, and then I can cut my yarn, and then each time I cut my yarn I'll leave about 4 inches of tail to weave in. Once I finish with my heart pattern, I have quite a few loose ends to weave in. Whether using a yarn needle or a crochet hook to weave in the loose ends, a good strategy would be to turn the work over and weave in along the wrong side. We want to weave in the ends so that they don't come undone and that they don't lose tension. So as you're weaving them in, you can put them underneath the strands on the wrong side, putting several bends in the yarn to add friction. And if you turned it over as you're weaving it through, you shouldn't see the needle. That'll help the strands not showing on the right side. So you want to weave in all the loose ends that remain when you finish the heart. Once you finish weaving in the loose ends, you may need to do some blocking to help the heart lie flat. Thanks for watching the video on how to Tunisian crochet a heart. Feel free to let me know how you liked the video and leave a comment below.